Time-lapse photography. Now, it usually involves taking hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures and then sitting down in front of the computer for hours, if not days sometimes, putting the sequence together. Everything from keyframing the images to adjusting white balance, adjusting the actual picture itself, and then eventually rendering the sequence to make the video. Now, this usually results in a video of probably just a few seconds, if not, you know, a couple of minutes at the most. Very lengthy process. Now, yes, you do get a lot of control over each image, but it is a time factor, so it does take a long time. So tonight I've come up to my local viewpoint, and there's the church in the distance there. Now I've come up with the Canon EOS R, and I'm going to try out the Timelapse Movie Mode. Now, with this movie mode, I'm able to record sequences, and it records a video file rather than separate pictures. So before I start, let's take a look at the settings that I use, how I set the camera up in the menus to get to the point where I'm ready to shoot. So first and foremost, let's get into the time-lapse mode, or the movie mode. First thing you do is press the mode button on top of the camera, then press info. This brings you up then to your shooting mode screen with all your different symbols here. So you've got A+, which is Scene Intelligent Auto. And then you've got shutter priority, aperture priority, and fully manual mode in the video settings. Plus you've got three separate customizable modes that you can set your own video modes into and save them. So let's start with the Scene Intelligent Auto. Once you've pressed that, you can touch the shutter button or Q, OK. And that brings you into your main screen then. You can see up here you've got the symbol which shows you which mode you're in. Now, one thing to bear in mind before I get started in the menu system is this here, Movie Digital IS. Now, if you haven't got that disabled, when you go into the time-lapse movie mode, that'll be blanked out, so it's worth getting that done first. It's also worth pointing out here that when this time-lapse movie mode is disabled, if you're trying to record with the manual movie setting, it'll only go down to 1/8 of a second and it won't go any further until this is actually enabled. And so let's start in on page 1, the red camera symbol at the top. So movie record quality. And if you go into this, you've got standard 24 frames per second. All I or IPB. I tend to use all I. You can shoot in 4K as well, but this will crop the image, which isn't a major problem. If it crops it too much, you can always use a wider lens or a wider focal length. So once you've chosen your mode, enable 24 frames per second, sound recording on, time code, don't worry about that, movie digital IS has got to be disabled. So into page 2, this is actually your time-lapse movie mode here. So if I click on that, now this, once I enable this, again 4K or full HD. So full HD is 1920 by 1080p, and obviously 4K is the full resolution file. And as I said, this will crop the image. So I'm going to start in full HD. So we've got our time-lapse at the top. If I come down through the menus now, so the interval only goes down to 2 seconds. If you do set it, you can set it to 1, but as soon as you press set, it jumps back to 2 seconds. So 2 seconds is the shortest gap that you can have between each shot. So press OK. Now you've got a number of shots. I've got this set on 350. Now if I increase my number of shots at this stage, if you keep watching the times at the bottom here, if I go into this, and if I change that to 550 frames, you'll see the clip length go from 14 seconds to 22 seconds, and then my actual shooting time to capture this sequence goes up to 18 minutes. Now if I increase this, there's 950 shots, again you can see how this affects the sequence itself. So with the interval time and the number of shots, it all depends on what you come out with at the bottom for your end of sequence shot. And again, it depends on on the subject that you're shooting. If you're shooting at night, for instance, this is going to be hours rather than minutes, and this is going to be probably the same sort of clip length because you're shooting longer exposure times with longer interval times as well. Auto exposure each frame. Now you can have it fixed at the first frame or each frame. Each frame I tend to find is better because the software inside the camera, it adjusts each frame for the exposure. Now the screen auto off is enabled, which obviously saves my battery power. So once we've set this up, touch the shutter button, that'll bring you back into your main screen here. Now you can see now this brings up this little box here which gives you your interval time and also your length of clip time as well. So once you're ready to go, press the record button on top of the camera with a little red button on there, and then to start the sequence press your shutter button. You can obviously set different buttons to do these functions, but I find that's the standard way to do it. And then that will start recording your sequence. And as you can see, as it's running through the sequence, you can see here it's giving you a countdown of how many frames. So I started off with 350 frames for this sequence, and it's counting down. Now in Scene Intelligent Auto, the camera does everything for you. So your shutter speed, your aperture and your ISO. Normally the white balance is set to auto white balance as well. You can adjust the white balance, I think, but obviously your shutter speed and everything else is set for you. Also you can go into the menus and set a bracket for things like your shutter speed length and your ISO speeds as well. And if I go into TV, which is your shutter priority, now here you set the shutter speed yourself, it chooses the aperture. AV, pretty self-explanatory, you choose the aperture, it chooses the shutter speed. And if you go back into fully manual, you can control this completely yourself. So your shutter speed, your aperture and your white balance and ISO. And if, as I was saying earlier, if you click on the shutter speed, you can see that reaches 1/8 of a second and doesn't go any lower. But if I go back into the menu, you can see Timelapse Movie is disabled. If I enable that now, if I go back into my screen, and now you can see that the shutter speeds go right down to 30 seconds. Now when I'm recording in manual focus, in the manual movie mode, if I go into my cue screen, set movie record size, you can see I've got a lot more choice of frame rates here. I'm currently set up on 25 frames per second in all I, but as I go down through, you can see there's 4K settings there as well, but there's also 720 frames per second at 50 frames per second mode, which is quite handy too. Now this sequence is actually running now, this day to night time-lapse sequence, and as you can see I've got clouds in the distance above the church there. You'll get the drop in light as well as the shadow creeps down the church. That's what I'm hoping. And as it turns after sunset, as the lights come on in the village, you'll get all that change as well. Now I'm shooting this in fully auto mode, the Scene Intelligent mode. Now before I put this sequence up, I've shot some sequences earlier this week, so let's have a look at these. This first sequence was taken up on Dartmoor. It's taken with a 100 to 400 lens, and it was taken on the Scene Intelligent mode, fully automatic, so it changes everything for you, your shutter speed, your aperture and your ISO, and the white balance is normally set on auto as well, so it can change depending on the conditions. Now this next sequence is a river up on Dartmoor. Now I wanted to get that kind of slow shutter speed, get that movement in the water, but also record the sequence and the water flowing. So for this sequence I've used fully manual mode, so I've set everything myself, including the white balance and the ISO. Now obviously in manual mode, if you've got any light changes during the sequence, then it will get lighter and darker, so it won't adjust. So this is one thing to bear in mind. And lastly, before I show you the sequence that I'm recording now, I've done a couple of night shoots in the city centre, in Plymouth city centre. Again, I've used the first sequence that I'll show you now has been done with fully auto on the scene intelligent mode, and you can see from this sequence that it's okay, it doesn't get it quite right. And the last night sequence, which I'll show you now, this has been done in AV mode. Slightly different approach. I wanted to try it in manual mode, but the light was dropping too quickly, so I went for AV mode, chose the aperture that I wanted, and I quite like the effect. Watch the traffic lights. So while my day to night sequence is going off still, let's discuss the pros and cons of a manual traditional approach to time-lapse photography, and obviously using something like the EOS R to record it in camera. First and foremost, I cannot deny the fact that you will get better control over the actual images in the sequence if you use the traditional approach. Yes, it takes hours to actually sit there and do the actual process of recording the sequence, and also the sequence of what goes into the images behind it, and actually putting the time-lapse together. So is the EOS R time-lapse feature a useful tool? Well, yes and no. I mean, primarily, like I say, I get better results overall if I use the traditional approach, but this is a good feature. I do like it, and I can see it's quite handy, especially for stuff like on here for YouTube, little small clips. It's great, and it does handle things quite well. You haven't got as much control, like I say, over the images as you would have if you do it traditionally, but overall, yes, I think it's a very good feature, and it's one of those features on the camera that it did kind of make my ears perk up when I heard about it. So yeah, I'm quite happy with it. Now, this current day to night sequence is going to run for about an hour and 20 minutes. So obviously I'm not going to expect you to sit there for an hour and 20 minutes watching me twiddling my thumbs. So I'll put this sequence up now, and I'll be very interested to know what you think of it, and also about the previous sequences that I've just put up. If you like what I'm doing, please, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. That'll tell you each time I put a new video up then. But thanks for sticking with it, and I've got lots of different videos planned, both on the digital system, on the Canon EOS R, and also my 4x5 setup as well. So I'm going to leave it there, and again, like I say, thank you for your time in watching this, and I'll see you on the next one.